So the establishment of forward troops with American military personnel, Poland's purchase of American military hardware, and President Duda's recent tour of America. These are three kind of related subjects for this chat on the KrakCast. The first part with the American troops, we've been talking about this for some time. This has been known for some time, so-called Fort Trump. At the invitation of the Polish government, the American military was invited to place a certain number of, a rather modest, small number of troops at some bases in Poland. Poland would share the cost, or maybe cover most of the cost of the operation of this of these bases. And in the last couple of weeks, it seems that this plan has moved forward quite a bit. Josh and Dr. Mike, it's hard to say exactly how much it's progressed because everybody talks about it in very vague and general terms. But it seems that we are at least a step or two closer to seeing this finally come to a reality. What is your take on the probable coming of American military bases in Poland?
Well, we already have a base of sorts in Poland. Just the troop count there is only in a couple of thousands, and it's not a permanent base. That's, NATO had an agreement with Russia back in the day that they would not build any new super bases in the new NATO countries, Poland, Estonia, the Baltic states. Instead, now they've built a base where it's intermittent, where they have, troops cycling in and out. And actually, this is probably more of the future of warfare of protection, because you don't want a huge base, which is one big target. But the idea of this future Fort Trump would be a forward operating base. So a place where if something does happen, we can bring in the soldiers, we can bring in the hardware, we can bring in the logistics. It's ready. And the funny thing is, NATO or the U.S. military might be more interested in this kind of scenario, because when they try to move troops around Germany between bases and in the country, people protest. You got ecologists and Greenpeace and WWF and whatever stopping tanks and stuff doing their practice runs.
Saying the Poles won't care if we screw up the environment and do whatever we want to do?
If Russia is invading, they don't care about, the rare and endangered frog that's on the highway between,
so
Warsaw
Germany's too
and
rich and spoiled. They care about these things, whereas
if
Poland,
you want to
not so
drive a
much.
tank, there's a small town in Poland.
We covered that last week. Driving tanks
So
around.
this base would more function as, in the unlikely and unfortunate scenario of a military conflict with any of our eastern neighbors, it would be a site.
Translation, Russia.
Yeah, brilliant euphemism. Any of our eastern neighbours. Yeah.
You mean Moldova?
Belarus, yes.
Yeah.
As a site where NATO could bring in its forces, quickly land, set up operations.
That's the whole rationale behind the existing operation in Germany, in Italy, in Spain, and elsewhere. That's supposed to be the forward base. Why do they have to move it one country east?
Well, I'll tell you why, John. Man, for a change, I've actually been reading about this, and
prepared, huh?
Well, no, I wouldn't go quite that far, but okay. There's a number of things here. We know from previous discussions on this subject where your position is in terms of any American military personnel being based in Europe whatsoever for any reason.
Zero.
There is a thing of this thing called NATO, which the member countries commit to pay in a certain percentage of GDP. Some countries do this, some countries don't. America more than pays its way, and it is the biggest country anyway, and its proportional contribution, thank you, goodness me, is even far greater than that. Of the European NATO countries that do contribute more than their share, the two notable examples are Britain and, in recent years, very notably, Poland. Poland, obviously, because they're being closer to potential Eastern aggressors, want to are more concerned about security. And in recent years, there has been increased build-up of weapons and military supplies in Kaliningrad, which is that little enclave of Russia that directly borders Poland on the Baltic Sea. So there is some kind of justification for increased NATO presence in Poland. And as I understand it, these extra troops that will be cycling, not on bicycles, obviously, but like on a rotational basis, kind of in and out of Poland, will not be fresh troops from America per se, but they will be taken from the numbers that are currently stationed in Germany, which is a big European country that currently pays less than its required contribution to NATO. So I have no issue with any of that.
Joshua mentioned that Poland is suggesting that it will actually pay for the infrastructure of this base, more than
yes.
$1 billion.
Although that will be, totally insufficient, I think. That's the kind of the Americans sort of did say, yeah, well, thanks very much, but that's not going to really do much with them. Put the fence
change
posts
under the Pentagon couch, basically.
I mean, I'll be honest. I'm an American file. I want Americans here. I want, the American way of life and those concepts to be spread around the world. And I want them to protect their interests around the world as well. I mean, I do.
I'm getting ahead of myself. What's the American interest in Poland? What is it?
Well, the American interest in Poland is to make sure that the Russians don't have too much influence here as well. Yeah. To make sure that they're kept in their little hole in the ground, and Putin, doesn't stick his head out the ground. And you have to, everybody says like, oh, what's Russia going to do? Well, nobody's, before Georgia, everybody was saying that Russia's not an issue, but they took over part of Ossetia there. Then they got a little angry in the Ukraine as well. So, I do believe that they are a credible threat. And it's not a matter of actually attacking them or any way, just to remind them that, this far and no further kind of scenario.
I think this is something that often doesn't seem to appear in discussions in the media about all of this. It's not about actual things actually happening. It's about dealing. It's about kind of escalation or not, or about kind of like you move a nominal 1,500 extra troops into a region. It is not declaring war. It is just saying to the other guy, oh well, just in case you're having any funny ideas, we'll just kind of it's like arranging your pieces on the board.
As if when you were mentioning Kaliningrad, it's not really talked about the fact that the Russians have put in nuclear arms there, and the short, medium-range missiles, which they declared earlier, in the 70s and 80s that, when they signed the agreements that they wouldn't be developing. Well, all of a sudden, they're there. And all of a sudden, the rest of Europe is a threat, and Poland, is threatened, and Poland is threatened. So, I want some kind of protection from that, and I am completely for the...
So Poland can turn to its European brothers then? Was this something we talked about
before? Screw Europe.
Before?
America's the only ones you can kind of count on.
And jump all
only
over the place
now,
here. Well,
actually.
Before I tell you why NATO is useless, and before I tell you again why NATO is useless, and before I complain about why this is Europe's problem and not America's problem, let's go back to, I mentioned there are three things: the American troops, the American purchase of military hardware, and Duda's tour of America last week. Let's go to the hardware part, which we had this funny image a few days ago when about a week ago now, actually, when Duda was in Washington. It was Trump and Melania and Duda and what's her name, Agata, his wife.
Agata, yeah.
It's the four of them on the White House lawn, and there's this dramatic flyover by the F-35, I think it's called, which is the plane that Poland has committed to buy from, is it McDonnell Douglas or Boeing? I don't know who makes it, but anyway. And you could almost hear Trump saying, "Hey, Andrzej, we've got some great financing deals available for you. What can we do to get you in this today? It's like a car,
would you like to trade in your MiGs?"
It's like a car salesman. It was pathetic. And Poland's agreeing to pay for this for Trump is somehow related or somehow connected or maybe conditional upon the money they're going to spend on American hardware, which is why he was in Washington to begin with, and it's all connected. So. Isn't it really easy to be cynical about this deal, to put the base here, if it's all about selling American planes?
I do think, like any kind of discussion about military hardware, when you have like someone, a representative of the military there, and the way they're kind of, when they start to justify the purchase of more equipment or building more aircraft carriers or whatever, the light that goes on in their eyes,
right.
Kind of like technology,
right.
Can you imagine if you're in the Polish Air Force, you're a pilot in the Polish Air Force, and the thought of getting your hands on an F-35, I mean,
and the extended warranty.
Maybe that's why suddenly America's all for getting cozy with more cozy with Poland, because their friends in the defense industry are saying, hey, we need to sell these planes to somebody, and the Portuguese or the Belgians aren't going to line up to buy them anytime soon. So maybe Poland's in the market. So let's be better friends with them. Isn't that
and it's not as if there's any Poles in America after all, is it? Yeah.
So Duda was in America last week. He was in Washington for these talks regarding the presence of the troops, of course, and these military hardware deals. He went to Houston. He met with Rick Perry, who is the Secretary of Energy, to talk about selling American energy resources. I think gas,
natural
oil,
gas, the liquefied gas, getting more of it.
He went to Nevada. Duda went to Nevada, met some kind of Polish stuff.
God, that sounds like a film title, isn't it? Duda went to Nevada.
Duda went to Nevada.
It sounds, it's like Las Vegas. It's like The Hangover Part 4.
Some kind of drone producer minister, and then he went to Silicon Valley, met with Susan Wojcicki. I don't know how you pronounce her name.
Wojcicki, it's like
she's the head of YouTube. And I guess Duda was kind of, probably blackmailed into doing whatever the Silicon Valley wants him to do because they know what his search history. Whatever, but it was a whirlwind tour, and I was kind of I follow Duda on Facebook, and looking at these pictures, I kind of realized for the first time what a cushy job it is to be the president of a parliamentary democracy, where you're basically just the goodwill ambassador, and you go around shaking hands and cutting ribbons. And don't get me wrong, I like Duda. I think he's a good guy. He has this nice presence. He seems like a likable guy. But what the hell was he doing for a week apart from just having a nice little holiday?
Oh, representing Poland's interests, of course.
Yeah, okay, I will say, okay, maybe I'm simplifying a little bit. I'm sure there was some work done, but
actually, John,
it doesn't seem like a really hard job.
Well, I mean, what is anomalous is the United States, where the chief executive and the head of the state are one and the same.
Well, that's true.
And Trump having recently been to a state visit to Britain and hanging out with our head of state, the Queen.
The Queen, yes.
Yeah.
Nice pat on the back.
Duda is constant. He's in America a lot, actually. He's in Washington a lot. He travels quite a bit.
Sorry, are you talking about Trump or Duda?
No, I'm talking about Duda.
Oh, right.
Trump's in Washington sometimes too, actually. Yeah. Duda travels there quite a bit. I guess it is, maybe because of the security relationship that we're establishing. I don't know, but let's bring it back to the troops present. So, Mike, you're all for it because it's good for Poland. Josh, you're all for it because it's good for Europe. Is that fair to say? Yeah,
that's fair. It's like I don't.
But like I say, I mean, I take your points on board, John. But like these,
I haven't even made my points yet. Well, getting to that in just a second. Repositioning in my chair here to get ready for that.
Okay, yeah. But yeah, like I say, these are American troops or US troops that have previously been stationed in Germany. So there is no greater European presence. It's just the European presence is being shifted closer towards any potential Eastern aggressors.
Mm-hmm. So like John, you said isn't this Europe's role to protect Poland? No, it's not. It should be, but I wouldn't count on Europe when it really.
You can really imagine Poland we would like 10,000 German troops to be stationed in the east of Poland.
You're kind of letting the mask slip when it comes to the European positioning. It's all about European brotherhood, but as you say, when the shit hits the fan,
I'm a real advocate of that. Yeah.
When the shit hits the fan, and when a certain country to the east, we all know who it is, if trouble really happens, the first thing that's going to happen in European capitals is that they will get on the phone to Washington. They will not be on the phone to London or Madrid or to Rome. They'll be on the phone to Washington saying,
actually, no, I think they will be on the phone to Moscow just to appease them and be on their side. And I think Poland will be left out in the rain again. This is why.
Let me go through my bullet point list of reasons why this is completely ridiculous.
Missile, yeah.
And by the way, Dave is going to regret that he wasn't here today. And when he listens to this, he's going to regret that he wasn't here to jump all over me. But anyway, he's not in today, so I can get through this uninterrupted almost. As I've said before on the show, Europe has a bigger population than America, a bigger economy than America, 2 declared nuclear powers in the European Union, and they're still dependent on a country across the ocean for their collective security. That's where I start my criticism of this whole arrangement. That's pathetic. It's ridiculous. NATO is grossly disproportionately funded by America. I think roughly 25% of the whole budget comes from America, which is way out of proportion.
No, it's more than that, I think.
Is it more than that?
It's like 70%.
And I think it depends on how you count. I don't know if it's 70%. That sounds like too much. But anyway, it's way out of proportion. We're spending this money. Why? So Germany can build expensive pipelines to import Russian gas and pay Russia billions of dollars.
And I think that is wrong. I mean, I agree.
We have no argument.
Remind
me
by why Washington, and that, in other words, that regular working people in America are paying for Germany's defense when Germany is all excited about giving Russia billions of dollars for
politics, isn't it? I mean,
pointed it out, and Poland agrees completely with the U.S. stance on this.
I'm just getting warmed up here.
Yeah.
NATO's foe, the Warsaw Pact, dissolved in 1991. Sounds like a joke even to say it. Dissolved in 1991. How many years ago was that? 28 years ago, without a foe. And since that time, since the Warsaw Pact disappeared in 1991, something like, I think 13, there's 29 NATO members, 13 of them added after the Warsaw Pact disappeared. They're adding 13 countries when there is no foe, at least formally and officially, right?
Foe is one of those words, if you say it enough time, it starts to sound slightly ridiculous, doesn't it? Where is my foe? I think I left it somewhere.
Mike, you mentioned yourself a few minutes ago Georgia and Ukraine, and that actually I kind of use the same example to make my case. Because it was in Georgia, there's a Secretary General of NATO. He's a Norwegian guy. I forgot his name exactly. Oh, by the way, do you know that there's never been an American Secretary General of NATO? You know how absurd that is? Because it maintains the fiction that this is an alliance, that we're, bullshit. There's been 2 Belgian guys, I think 2 Portuguese guys, a Norwegian guy, never been an American in charge of NATO. Are you fucking kidding me?
Let's put it this way. If war declared, then it's the U.S. president that will be in charge.
Probably. So anyway, a few years ago in Tbilisi, in the capital of Georgia, the Secretary General of NATO says that we have agreed that it is in our interest that the doors are open for Georgia to join NATO. They want Georgia in NATO. Now, in 2008, as you mentioned, Georgia sent troops into South Ossetia, which is like this breakaway republic. Mm-hmm. In the process, they killed some Russian peacekeepers. In retaliation, Putin sends the Russian army in to retake southern Ossetia. The Russian army goes into Georgia. Now, if Georgia were a NATO member at that time, suddenly America is obligated by treaty to go nose to nose with Russia over a piece of some wasteland bullshit place on the map that nobody can find. Is that really what we want? That's the way to trigger World War III, is to get America and Russia in a conflict caused by a third party. World War I, anybody? Hello? Caused by a third party where neither of the big players involved have any critical national interest. That's how trouble gets started.
The problem with these kind of counterfactuals is that we have to consider all the possibilities, and even then we don't actually know because it didn't actually happen. How Putin would have behaved in South Ossetia would have been markedly different had Georgia been a member of NATO.
Okay, absolutely, that's true. But even a couple of years ago in the Ukraine with the Crimea, if the Ukraine were a NATO,
but there was someone in the White House who was clearly
uninterested, who was sucking cock.
Actually, on the subject of Georgia, Georgia Europe, that is, or Georgia not America. Did you see the thing in the news this week about there was a Russian, a somewhat controversial Russian figure who was invited to speak in the Georgian parliament, and the people of Tbilisi got very, very, very angry indeed about this, and there were riots, and there were 2 people lost an eye from an eye each, presumably, from rubber bullets. It was reported in the BBC, so obviously it's
must be true.
It actually happened. Look, but anyway, the Georgians do not like Russians.
I've heard. But, I think it's easy for Europeans to say, yeah, America should do this. All the benefits and no costs. As an American, I say, what's in it for us? What's in it for us? We're already committed in so many places. We're supposed to preserve the integrity of South Korea's borders and the security of Japan and Germany's borders and Europe's borders.
South Korea is a condition of the peace treaty that
armistice
holds the Korean War in abeyance because it's not officially ended, has it?
50,000 troops in Japan, like 30,000 in South Korea, 20,000 in Germany. I think, Josh, there's like 10,000 American troops in the UK right now. Why on earth are there 10,000? And that's just troops. That doesn't include dependents, their family members and whatnot. Why on earth does the UK need 10,000 American troops?
It used to be like 400,000 up
huge,
until,
of course. But it's just ridiculous. At what point does Europe take care of itself and defend itself and manage its own affairs by itself?
Because, strategically, Britain is very, very useful to the United States because of its position on the globe, relatively speaking, and our historical,
That's why Iceland's in NATO as a refueling base, basically.
Well, yeah.
They kind of fought that for a while as well.
But there's the whole kind of the nuclear business, the nuclear weapons business between the majority of American military personnel in Britain are related to the Air Force and long range bombers and missiles.
It's not the Navy, it's the Air Force.
Yeah, so yes, you're legitimate in including that in your complaint, but I don't think that. I think there is strong justification for that. If Britain and America are members of NATO for whatever reason, then there is justification for that.
I pretty much agree with your points in that sense. And they're legitimate, and I think Europe has had it too easy for the last couple of generations.
Where the Dolce Vita, while America paid for it.
Exactly, they built up their welfare state. They had it easy, and they don't realize that security costs money. But
okay, fair question. Does does taking NATO right up to Russia's doorstep in the form of membership for Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, potentially Georgia, potentially Azerbaijan, does that increase the chance for conflict or decrease the chance for conflict? The answer is obvious. It increases it. If Russia were suddenly,
I'm afraid
if Russia were suddenly making friends again with Cuba or Venezuela or Central America, America would rightfully say, "Get the hell out of our front yard." Well, we are right on Russia's doorstep, and now we want to put troops even closer, as if Russia. As if Germany were close enough.
Here, because
now we want to go closer. It's ridiculous.
I think the issue was because of the administration in the U.S. between 2008 and 2016, where they were soft on Russia. That's when Russia got a little too uppity. It started going to Georgia. It started going to the Ukraine because they realized there'll be no resistance. They started having more influence in the Middle East. They started having more influence in Latin America. And no matter what you might think about American imperialism whatsoever, I'd rather be in the American sphere of influence than the Russian sphere of influence, especially since the Russians want to have a sphere of influence, and they historically think that they deserve a sphere of influence in this area. And I'm like, screw you, Putin, stay out of my backyard. And Poland, unlike most of the European countries, is open to having a relationship with the United States, not NATO specifically, but with the United States, and is ready to pay for it and do and agree to the whatever the U.S. wants to have that relationship.
And Poland is a big country, and you're absolutely right. And I think that is, like basically NATO is the existing framework. We can kind of agree with you on some of the, the main points of your criticisms of NATO, but I think exactly as Mike says, from the Polish perspective, to have some kind of bigger than commercial alliance with America when there are kind of common interests.
Don't punish Poland for other European countries' lack of gratitude, to put it bluntly.
And the Baltic states, of course, which is a separate issue, is that countries that are, I'm sure very, very grateful for their newfound independence and are not big enough or wealthy enough or substantial enough to be able to individually defend themselves.
By bringing them into the alliance, are we really making NATO stronger? I mean, no offense to this Baltic states.
No, I don't think
we're not. We're increasing the obligations and the risk of NATO, but not doing much to increase its capabilities and its power.
Well, it depends. I mean, I don't know what Latvia and Estonia and Lithuania are paying for the privilege of being in NATO. I mean, it may be that they're paying, a disproportionate premium compared to the size and importance of their countries.
Two more points here. One is the simple point that I'm frustrated by the fact that everybody wants America to guarantee the borders of, for example, Poland and the countries in the Middle East and Asia, wherein our own borders are wide open. And if, we talk about the current example of building a wall, which might be extreme, that'll drive people into hysterics. But those same people are suddenly very serious about the territorial integrity of the Ukraine, for example, and what we need to do to preserve that. That irritates me. But
I understand that, but I'll be one of the people that say, like, the U.S. should protect its own borders, just like I would hope it protect the borders of its allies as well.
Here's the thing, and I direct this more at you, Josh, as a European yourself. What's frustrating for me, very frustrating, is it's kind of like the schizophrenia, split personality of many Europeans to any U.S. foreign action. One day, it's Yankee go home. The next day, it's literally, please put troops in our country. One day, it's, you have no business in this or that country, get out. The next day, it's America, you need to do something in Syria, in Darfur, in Venezuela, and so on and so on. Humanitarian emergency, you have to do something. So it's one day to the next, it's just 180 degrees completely different. Help us, go away. Do something, don't do anything. And so no matter what we do, we get beat up because we're not doing whatever Europe wants on that particular day. And so at a certain point, a lot of people just put their hands up and say, you know what, screw you guys, deal with it yourselves. Okay, I'm done.
Yeah. Well, of course, I mean, clearly you need to read more of the European media to understand more closely the truth of things and what people really feel. No, I mean, I think a big part of this, and I absolutely, it's impossible to disagree with that perception, especially from what you see in the media. But the truth is that it's not the same people saying those things, except for maybe a select group of special hypocrites. The kind of people, I mean, just as like America is not full of kind of like rednecks called, Wilbur and Joe Bob, Europe is not full of, I can't even.
Turtleneck philosophy teachers.
Yeah.
Sitting outside, sipping a cappuccino.
Yeah.
Contemplating the meaning of life.
I think
47-year-old PhD graduate students on the government dole.
I think there's one word that kind of encapsulates the whole issue of kind of liberal European attitudes towards America, and that word is Starbucks, which is kind of like simultaneously despised and yet embraced, depending on which kind of country.
Right, well, staying on issue here, we should also mention the fact that there were other things discussed during this meeting of Duda and Trump. In the memorandum they signed, there was another thing that actually I don't think has been talked about too much, was espionage and spying and drones. Poland has agreed to allow the U.S. to base some of their drones for Eastern Europe in Poland. So these drones would be flying around Poland, Eastern Europe, what other countries. And the agreement was that Poland would also be, depending on the discretion of the U.S. military, privy to the information they've gathered. So I think that's actually kind of cool.
Oh, actually, yeah. No, that one had passed me by.
Here's another question, and Dr. Michael, I'll direct this at you as our token Polish guy on the podcast. Do you think, I don't know how to put this in the proper soft, easy terms, do you think that maybe, just maybe, in the Polish media and the Polish society and the Polish mind, that the threat from Russia just might be a little bit exaggerated?
I go both ways. Sometimes I think it's exaggerated. Sometimes I think about the Ukraine and the influence Russia has in the Baltic states. I'd like to think, no, they're exaggerating. But you know what? I'd rather be safe than sorry.
I just sometimes think that
Putin, especially in the situation economically in his country, he knows that the only way to sometimes unify a country is to find an outside force or an outside issue. And the Russians are very good when it comes diplomatically and politically to find strengths outside of their own country. They definitely bat outside of their
They punch above their weight.
But that's the analogy I was going there.
I just get the feeling, and again, as an outsider, I'm not Polish, so maybe my opinion doesn't count for shit. But I have the feeling that too many people here still think that it's September 17th, 1939, and the Soviet Union has invaded from the east, and we've discovered the secret pact with the Nazis, and they're always in that same mentality. They're always they're always a threat. They're going to invade. There are ancient foes, and it's going to go on forever. Russia is pathetic in lots of ways. You take oil and gas out of the equation. It's sorry, no offense, but
nuclear weapons
and nuclear
big boom booms. Yeah,
yeah, that's okay. Fair point. But I mean, as an economic player, they have barely just a few more people than Mexico. Their economy, the per capita GDP, I think, is lower than Poland, right? So they're kind of I don't want to say a joke because I'm asking Russian.
They are, but that's the problem.
But they're a joke with a big fist.
Yes, okay? and they're willing to use it, which.
And a short temper, yeah.
And the Ukraine have shown.
Okay, so if they're willing to use it and if they have a short temper, why are we putting NATO on their doorstep? Why are we
because
putting
we're not
soldiers
bombing them,
in front of them?
We're just kind of, reinforcing ourselves, kind of. I mean, look, okay, much as I get all your arguments about this, John, and they're good ones, the point remains that if we didn't do any of those things, then it gets close to being a tacit invitation, kind of. Putin was able to do what he did in Ukraine precisely because he started it.
Nobody
could
reacted.
have been some pushback, but there wasn't.
React.
I agree with you totally about the bordering on paranoia that exists in this country about the Russians. I think that it's totally misplaced. It's totally out of all proportion. But it is very convenient for the time being to kind of allow that kind of. Intrinsic kind of mistrust of the Russians for the time being, because look, Poland is a country that is still regaining its kind of sense of self as an independent nation after having like national pride forever, but like constantly having to fight for existence. Now they're there, they're taken. And taken seriously, a major player in Europe, a major player in negotiations with the United States, a major player in NATO. From Russia's point of view, there is no, with the possible exception of China, there is no bigger potential enemy than Poland in terms of neighbours. The Polish, I mean, I've seen some figures on this, which unfortunately I can't remember, but actually the disparity or lack of disparity between the Russian military and the Polish military is such that, and I mean, we saw this even during the communist era. They were quite happy to send the tanks into Czechoslovakia in 1968. They weren't willing to do that.
Budapest in 56.
Yeah, they weren't willing to do that with Poland.
So they respect Poland more in terms of its ability to push back.
But they were always used to having Poland in their sphere of influence, and there's
yes.
But just to circle back, my point is that, again, another element or another aspect of the hypocrisy is that when it comes, for example, the Middle East, it's always just stay out. Don't stick your nose in it. It's their business, and your presence there, the American presence there, is enough to trigger the problems. Well, why don't we apply that same logic?
Because it's
to
a
this
utopian
situation?
area.
Why don't we apply the same logic here? That you just stay out and not putting forward bases right next to this potential adversary is the better way to peace and stability, rather than constantly agitating for some kind of confrontation. So in the Middle East, it's stay out. In Europe, it's put troops.
I don't want to talk about the Middle East in this scenario. I'm just saying, as biased and objective by living here and being Polish, I'd rather have the U.S. here. I feel safer.
But why don't you? Okay, but
I don't trust the Europeans.
Mike, as a European, why don't you look again to your European brothers for safety in numbers? Why don't you look to the Spanish and the French and the Italians for protection and help? Why
that's a joke.
Why look to America?
Yes, I'm afraid so.
Why
because they've spent the last 50 years looking to the U.S. for protection, and they didn't have to worry about it, and they could always whine about it like some ungrateful teenagers when their parents are looking after them.
Yeah, but this teenager is like 70 years old, though. So.
To be honest, I mean, you complain about why the heck, America is getting involved in all these countries around the world that are not America.
Yes.
I mean, I think that there are lots of good reasons why America and Europe should continue to enjoy strong ties, connections, for cultural reasons as much as anything. What is going to happen is the area where America has been heavily invested for decades now is the Middle East, is that America is now not only a net energy exporter, it is actually the world's biggest energy exporter. Sure. It is no longer reliant in any sense of the word. There is a use for Middle Eastern oil, but there's only a use for it. And if the American market disappears, and it is dwindling, the usefulness of the Middle East becomes less and less and less. And then they're going to find that they're going to have to settle down and fight their own.
I think I'd be less upset about this whole subject if I was more confident that young men from Ireland and young men from Sweden and young men from Austria and young men from Portugal were equally willing to be put in harm's way and potentially make the ultimate sacrifice like American soldiers are routinely asked to do. And I don't have that feeling at all. I have the feeling that the European soldiers get a pass and America gets the bill, both in terms of blood and cash.
Sure, yeah.
I can't speak for everybody, but I have a feeling that Polish people will be more likely to help America with blood.
Yeah,
in
that's
that
true.
sense,
That's true.
Than most Europeans. And going back to what you were talking about earlier with the Middle East and the whole energy aspect of America's involvement in the rest of the world, we have to also remember that with Duda was in the U.S. Right now as well. He was also talking about energy
in Houston, I think.
Exactly, in Houston. And the whole discussions there was mainly about natural gas being sent over to Poland, liquefied natural gas, because you also have to remember that Poland gets a lot of its energy from Russia, going back to our previous discussions here. And Poland wants to, diversify its energy sources. So one of that is natural gas. It's already getting a lot of natural gas from the U.S. Now it's going to be even more so. So they've signed new deals. And there's also more and more talk about building a nuclear power plant in northern Poland. It's been on and off for a while, but it's supposed to happen. And now there's talk there's been talk earlier, but now it's back about Westinghouse building a nuclear power plant here in Poland. It will be a public-private endeavor, and hopefully, from a Polish standpoint, Westinghouse would be footing at least half of the bill, because we're talking about billions here.
Yeah, well, energy policy is definitely one of the factors in any kind of discussion of, Poland's security arrangement, its relationship with Russia, relationship with other parts of Europe. Oil and natural gas is always right in the background.
This is we're expanding a little bit from the kind of the topic of this talk here, but the kind of energy situation in Europe and also areas such as climate policy, as you probably noted this last week. There was a mooted European Union kind of commitment to zero emissions by 2050, which was robustly kicked into touch by Poland, Czech, and Hungary, probably usually
usually vote.
But anyway, the countries that are and have a very legitimate reason for that, in that the coal is the biggest source of energy. Now, and this is where we circle around this time and time again. If you can't have coal, what are you going to have for energy? And the big N word kind of keeps kind of like a bad smell cropping up in the corner. Like, oh, no, but we can't. But like, actually, guys, if you want zero emissions and you don't want coal, and you face up to the reality that kind of wind and solar just ain't going to supply you with power.
The N-word being nuclear, by the way.
Nuclear, yeah. So, figure it out. Which is worse, kind of, like carbon dioxide or nuclear?
Josh, you happen to know some, without getting too deep into the weeds, you happen to have maybe a deeper knowledge about nuclear power than your average man on the street for different reasons. Tell us what would be involved with getting kind of even a I don't know what the right word is, the basic model or the kind of the entry-level nuclear power plant up and running in Poland.
I have no idea what the cost would be like in terms of the design.
Yeah.
Essentially,
because sorry, I should have mentioned. I understand that in some ways, nuclear power plant technology is very much stuck about 30 years ago. We haven't really progressed much. In the last 3 decades.
Yeah. I mean, okay, so I'll try and do this very, very briefly, but because of some nuclear incidents in the 80s, and then of course followed up by Fukushima more recently. There was essentially like a kind of moratorium or frozen development of nuclear power, and of course it was like slowly it was decided this is not a good thing, it's not safe, it was being phased out. What that has meant is that there is not one but indeed two generations of technical people, scientists, engineers, nuclear engineers, that just no longer exist. The young generation of nuclear engineers in the 1980s are approaching retirement age, and there is nobody following in their footsteps. And we can have the situation in less than 10 years' time where you could build a perfectly functional nuclear power station to kind of, shall we say, early 80s standards, not Russian standards, I'll add.
Proper standards.
You could follow all the instructions, but there will be no one alive who actually has hands-on experience
of dealing with it.
And it is really, I mean, it's a bizarre thing, and you guys know this because I mentioned it, because my father was in this business, and he was a young man when nuclear power was beginning to become kind of important in the 1960s. And, well, I mean, he's been dead 5 years, and there's maybe one generation after him that kind of was involved in nuclear. So there is, there's a lack of expertise. There's a lack of, like hands-on experience.
I would like to see Poland go nuclear. I think it would, do a lot for us environmentally, and it would force a recalculation of the relationship with Russia, which maybe in turn would force a recalculation of the security situation, and the American troops can go home. Happy ending, right, Dr. Mike?
Kumbaya, yeah.
All right, well, I'm not sure if our conversation bears any resemblance to what was promised at the beginning, but we did our best. We kind of covered lots of bases here.
I like what you did there. Yeah.
Oh, that was an accident. Okay. Okay. So thanks for that, Josh. So now you know everything you need to know about the American troops, and a few details about Duda's visit, and lots of complaining about NATO and Russia and stuff like that. Thanks for listening, everybody, and we'll talk to you next time on KrakCast Chats.